let's start the first part of session 11. In session 11, we are going to cover different aspects of emotions and discussing about basics of emotions, emotion and mental health, positive and negative valence in emotions, neuroanatomy of emotions. We'll talk about temporal dynamics. And at the end, we will discuss about is there any chance that we can intervene in emotions. And we probably can have something like an entire course just on emotion, discussing about different aspects of emotion. And so I will try to kind of limit the things that we are going to discuss about in the limited amount of time that we have, trying to give you a sense about the current status of our understanding from a neuroscience perspective towards emotion. In terms of the basic definitions for emotion, first of all, we need to know that when we talk about emotions, we are talking about a response to a specific cue or trigger. And that specific cue or trigger could be internal or external. So it could be related to something like, for example, a specific memory that you have just retrieved, or something that you are seeing outside, something like an angry person, or something that is not kind of really something that you are not really happy with that is happening outside. So it could be an external or internal trigger, but we are talking about a response. So when we talk about emotions, it's about a response to a cue or trigger. And when we talk about this response, so we can have something like a timeline in terms of, okay, this response starts from here, goes up to here, and then just go down. So there is a, let's say, temporal response, temporal dynamics for a response. So we have, let's say, a trigger here, and then there is a time to start, and then there is a kind of a time to just go up to that emotion, and then the time to go down, and the amount of duration of the time that we would remain at that emotion. So we talk about response, it is related to a trigger, and there is a temporal, let's say, process for that response. And then when we talk about emotions, emotions could have, or basically should have, different components. We should have a physiological component or a somatic component that would include, let's say, changing in the heart rate, changing in the blood pressure, changing the respiratory rate, changing in your skin conductance, or the amount of sweating that you make. So all those behavior, all those sort of kind of peripheral responses that are happening in your body that are related to that specific emotion. And then there could be motor responses in terms of the specific behavior that you do. The motor response could be, let's say, approaching, or withdrawing. So you can just go towards the stimuli or just avoid that. So there could be different types of motor responses to the emotions. And then we have definitely cognitive responses. There are lots of processes happening inside your brain when you have that specific emotion, and there are specific cognitive functions that would be stopped when you have when you are experiencing different sort of emotions. So we need to have these components together to be able to say that we have an emotional response to a cue or trigger that is happening outside. And of course, when we talk about emotion, we need to think about, okay, usually we are talking about few seconds to few minutes or up to few hours. So that is the sort of time course of an emotional response in most of the cases. So technically, when we want to think about the temporal aspects of emotion, we are thinking about, let's say, few seconds towards few hours. But even in kind of this, let's say, timeline of describing sort of emotional response, we know that we probably can divide the process in two major parts. One part would be an initial response that would be really rapid, with an initial what we call appraisal of the stimuli that would be happening really fast. But meanwhile, we can have, let's say, a secondary appraisal, or what we call a reappraisal. And most of the time when we start to report an emotion, that would be in this, let's say, time scale in terms of after a few seconds. So it might be a little bit hard in the first few seconds of responding to a stimuli to say whether it is something like anger, fear, or happiness. But over a kind of few seconds to few minutes, then we can have, let's say, more awareness. So this one is, let's say, more unconscious response, and this one is more, let's say, aware response or conscious response. And probably we do not have very much control in this one, and we have a sort of better control on this one. Let me make you an example. For example, when you are seeing a video, let's say a movie, a trailer movie, you're seeing a trailer movie and something bad suddenly happens there. For example, a bomb would just explode in the movie. So you might just feel a kind of a sense of fear for just few seconds, but afterward you would feel, okay, this is just only a movie, and you just calm down in the second step. So in the initial step, you would have an initial appraisal, but then you would say to yourself, okay, it's just a movie, so I'm not going to be scared very much. So then you can just change the shape of the emotion. Or you might kind of continue to expand the emotion because you feel that it is a real, genuine response, because, I mean, when something really bad happens outside, you cannot continue to have that emotion. If you secondary and consciously appraise that emotion as something kind of that is supposed to continue. So you can just turn it off, or you can continue that emotion in the secondary appraisal. So we can probably have this dichotomy of considering emotions in two pieces. One that would be a rapid response, non-controlled, mainly with physiological changes. The second one would be more conscious, more aware. You can self-report, you can name it, you can talk about that, and you might be able to down-regulate that based on these reappraisal strategies, or the second look that you would start to consider. And most of the time, I mean, even in, let's say, addiction therapy literature, we usually tell people that you are not responsible for the first look because you do not have that level of control. But the second look is under your control. So you need to consider that, okay, if I have a attentional bias to something that is related to, let's say, drugs, that should be not very much under your control in the first place, but the second look would be under your control. You need to control the second look. But in the same context, then we have things that we call mood. So the major difference between mood and emotion, as we have here, as we discussed, emotion is a response. But mood goes towards having something like a state that is far more stable than emotion. And it would go from hours to days to weeks to months. So it could be pretty much stable. In some cases, it could be even something like a trait. So there might be people who are dysphoric in their entire life. So they just feel that whatever I'm remembering from myself, I've not been a really happy person. I'm not a happy person. I probably would not be a happy person for the future. So there are people who even have sort of a level of traits for these sort of kind of emotional status that they have it for their entire life. So we can call it personality trait. And we have something in between that would be between mood and personality trait, that would be specific, mainly psychiatric illnesses, things like depression, anxiety, that you have that for few weeks or few months or even few years, but we can modulate them and we can treat them to be able to control those unwanted, let's say, mood experiences that you really don't like. So you can see that we are still talking about the same sort of context. Let's say being anxious. It could be being anxious in the first few seconds, remaining anxious for the next couple of minutes, being overall anxious, as we call general anxiety disorder, just experiencing general anxiety over time. That is called the anxious mood. And it could get to a level that we call generalized anxiety disorder. That would be a disorder that is more expanded. And then there could be some specific, let's say, neurotic traits that could be expanded through the entire life. So we can have a sort of a temporal dimension towards what we are discussing about. And then the other aspect of emotions could be what we call the dimensions of emotion, how we define different levels of emotions. In this, let's say, dimensional aspect of emotion, we can think about emotion in two dimensions. One would be the level of pleasantness that we have, or what we call the valence. So whether it is pleasant or not, and then the level of arousal, whether it's high arousal or low arousal, okay? And you can imagine that for each sort of emotion, you can have them in let's say, different parts of this space. For example, let's say, most of the time when you talk about somebody who is angry, it's an unpleasant kind of feeling, and it is pretty much in the high arousal side. So it would go for this side. Fear and being afraid would be in the same side as well. Things like being sad, it's a negative valence, but with low arousal. So being sad would be here. And then think about something that is pleasant, but with low arousal. What would be coming here? Just write in the chat space. Relaxed state, calmness, meditation, calmness, okay? Okay, what should we have here in high arousal and pleasant? Yes, as you see here, surprised, motivated, euphoric, excited, surprised, of course. So these are the things that would go for this dimension. So this is what we call a two-dimensional representation of emotions. And there are people who think that is the best model of describing emotions, and there are people who do not believe that. So we will discuss about that in the next steps as well. We can do that with different sort of experiences, so people can put that in something like a diagram like this in terms of the valence and arousal, low, high. As you can see here, seeing and smiling baby would be higher kind of in valence, high in arousal. So I mean, you can see that you can put different, let's say, even words in different parts of that emotional dimension. It is, let's say, two-dimensional emotional kind of evaluation. Let's add some other, let's say, basics to emotions. So when we talk about emotions, as I told you, we can have approach versus avoidance. So that is one aspect of emotion, one behavioral aspect of emotion. Whether we approach or withdraw, whether we go for it or just avoid it. And then we can have different motivational states, whether it is rewarding or punishment. Things like thirst, hunger, pain, craving. These are sort of motivational states. It's really hard to tell these experiences as emotional states. They are mainly motivational states. So as you can see here, there is a little bit of a difference between what we call a motivational state and an emotional state. But let's add other things to this. And then we have mood. Things like depression, anxiety, mania. These are basically mood aspects. And then we have some sort of background emotion, being cheerful, like, I mean, the experience that people had after the kind of release of presidential kind of election here in US, the release of the results, we had people who were worried and people who were mainly cheerful. So they might experience that sort of background emotion through their entire day, and having that background emotion there for their entire kind of event week or months. And then we have what we call emotion system. An emotion system comes from, let's say, mainly animal neuroscience. So based on the animal models of addiction, of emotions, we realize that there might be at least 4 different systems of emotion. I will give you more details about that, but these basically 4 systems of emotion might be involved in terms of the neuroscience of emotion. And these 4 systems, basically the seeking system, that you just do an approach behavior towards something. The rage system is anger and kind of being furious, as you can see for this. Probably, I don't know, it might be kind of a chimpanzee or whatever. And then fear, and then panic. And when we talk about panic, you might feel that, I mean, panic and fear would be close to each other, but what we have with fear would be mainly escape behavior. But panic here is also associated with what we call grief. So in animals, panic and grief are pretty much bound to each other, and there are a level of social attachment for them. So people, I mean, those animals would have social attachment for those, let's say, joint grief or panic that they might experience. It is quite different with the kind of fear, in terms of the fear would be associated with escape. So you can see that these systems are interacting with each other. I mean, there are ideas that these are the different emotional systems that are working together. And then the idea of, okay, there are some basic emotions: happiness, fear, anger, disgust, sadness, surprise, contempt. So some basic emotions that are independent from each other. So you can see that there are different terminologies, different, let's say, levels of definitions for what we have in terms of the emotions. But we can also have another dimension, which is called the social aspect of emotion. So there are emotions that they are meaningless out of the social context. So they need to have a social context. When we talk about pride, when we talk about embarrassment, when we talk about guilt, shame, maternal love, sexual love, infatuation, admiration, being jealous, all those sorts of kind of emotional experiences could not be happening without having anybody, without having others outside you. So you experience these emotions in the context of social interactions. So these are called social emotions. Okay, so this part was technically some basic definitions of what we call emotion and different aspects of emotion. I hope that now you have a sense about some basic definitions in terms of the emotion, mood, how they are related to each other, how they might be interacting with sort of behavioral responses, whether it's approach or avoidance, or motivational aspects of emotion, whether it's craving or thirst or hunger. So all those motivational aspects of emotions.